Have you ever ruined something by trying too hard to fix it? Maybe you've rewritten a message so many times that it stopped sounding like you. Edited a photograph until it barely looked real anymore. Rearranged something in your home until it somehow lost the feeling it had before. Or maybe you spent years trying to change something about yourself that wasn't actually broken. I think we're strangely obsessed with fixing things. We see something we don't like and our first thought is, how do I get rid of this? And I started thinking about that while painting this dragonfly. Why do we want to correct everything? When you're making art, it's incredibly easy to become obsessed with correction. A line isn't quite right, a color isn't exactly what you imagined. Something went somewhere it wasn't supposed to, and suddenly you're no longer looking at the painting as a whole. You're staring at that one tiny thing, and you can't stop thinking about fixing it. But I've started wondering whether something is actually wrong simply because it isn't what we originally planned. Maybe we're sometimes confusing unexpected with incorrect. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. That's something I wanted to experiment with in this painting. I left the graphite lines visible because I liked the handmade quality they gave the dragonfly. I didn't want it to look like the drawing had never existed. I wanted you to see the person behind it. And then I became much less controlled with the background. I played with soft bubbles from a little bubble one, added drips and splashes, and allowed the watercolor to do things I couldn't completely predict. Some marks worked better than others, and instead of immediately trying to remove everything I didn't like, I started asking myself, what can I do with this? And this is actually something that makes me think about very current AI art. We're now surrounded by images that can be produced in seconds. You can describe something and an AI can generate an incredibly polished image almost immediately. Perfect lighting, perfect composition, perfectly smooth details. And I'm not saying that automatically makes those images bad. AI art can be fascinating, and obviously it's becoming a huge part of the visual world we're living in. But I do wonder what happens to our expectations when we're constantly looking at images that have been optimized to look impressive. We get used to perfection, and then we look at a handmade painting and see an uneven line, a strange watercolor bloom, or a little mistake. And our first reaction can become, why doesn't this look as perfect? That's what I find interesting. We're not necessarily comparing two artworks anymore. We're comparing human time and effort with something that can produce an image in seconds. And I think there's a danger in becoming so accustomed to polished images that we stop appreciating evidence of the person who made something. A handmade painting that takes time. You can see the decisions. You can see where the brush touched the paper. You can see where the artist changed their mind. You can even see where something didn't go according to plan. We can start mistaking speed for creativity and polish for beauty. And maybe those aren't the same things. But here's where this gets uncomfortable. I'm not saying we should celebrate every mistake. Some things genuinely need fixing. If a painting has a problem that distracts from everything else, I'll fix it. If something in life is hurting us, obviously we should try to change it. So I don't think the answer is simply everything imperfect is beautiful. That's too easy. The harder question is, how do we know what actually needs fixing? Because sometimes we don't really want to fix something. We want to avoid accepting it. And that's a much more uncomfortable idea. Because acceptance means admitting that something happened that we can't undo. Maybe a relationship changed. Maybe a plan didn't work. Maybe we became someone different from who we thought we'd be. Maybe there's something about ourselves that we've spent years treating as a problem simply because it doesn't fit the image we had in our head. And sometimes we keep trying to correct the situation because accepting it feels like giving up. But acceptance isn't necessarily giving up. Sometimes it's simply acknowledging this is what I have to work with now. I think watercolor is a really good teacher for this. You put down water, you add pigment, and then you have to wait. The paint moves, it spreads, it mixes. Sometimes it creates something beautiful. Sometimes it creates something you absolutely didn't want. And you can't always chase it around the paper trying to make it behave. Eventually, you have to decide whether you're going to fight it or work with it. That's basically what happened with this painting. I had a general idea of where I wanted to go, but the visible graphite, the bubbles, the drips, and the splashes all introduced things that weren't completely planned. And instead of making the entire painting conform to my original idea, I allowed the idea itself to change. The dragonfly became the controlled element. The background became the unpredictable one. And I actually think that contrast is what gives the painting its personality. Maybe that's what I'm learning about making art. I'm not trying to stop caring about quality. I'm not trying to make mistakes on purpose. And I'm definitely not saying that handmade art is automatically better than something digital or AI generated. I just don't want perfection to become the only thing we know how to appreciate. Because there is something special about looking at a painting and knowing that it couldn't have happened in exactly the same way twice. The water moved differently, the brush made a slightly different mark, the artist made a decision in that particular moment, and that moment is now permanently there. And maybe that's why I'm becoming more interested in what happens when we stop trying to fix everything immediately. Not just in art, in life too. Sometimes you need to change something. Sometimes you need to walk away. Sometimes you need to repair something. And sometimes you simply have to accept that the picture is different from the one you originally imagined. Then you have a choice. You can spend the rest of your time wishing you could go back. Or you can ask, what can this become now? I think that's a much more interesting question. So I'll leave you with this. Is there something in your own life that you once desperately wanted to fix, but now realize became part of what made you who you are?